If you've ever read or heard about a government action and said to yourself, that just doesn't make sense, you might like this next conversation. Our guest, Philip Howard, wrote the 1995 book, The Death of Common Sense. He's also founder and chairman of the group Common Good, and he's now written a book titled Try Common Sense. Welcome to the program.
Nice to be with you.
So I understand this latest book really does focus on government being broken because there's not enough common sense in many ways.
Well, it's because we made common sense illegal. And so I propose a new governing vision that gives back to people the freedom to use their judgment, including in public choices, and to be accountable for how they do.
I understand that part of this is basically a reset of how government works. How so?
Yeah, so what's happened is that over the last 50 years, the bureaucracy has grown in ways that nobody ever really intended. At this point, it's in federal law alone, it's 150 million words. No one can know it. No small businessman can know all the rules that apply to him and such. And it's literally impenetrable. Even the people in government don't have the authority to give a permit. I mean, in the crisis in 2009, President Obama got $800 billion from Congress to stimulate the economy, including to rebuild broken infrastructure. And he could spend almost none of it because he didn't have the authority to give a permit. It would take 5 or 10 years to give a permit to do what everybody knew was obvious.
So if we have to do this reset, what's the first thing we do?
Well, I mean, ultimately, what's needed in this situation, because Congress is hopeless, but frankly, most legislative bodies can't sit there with hundreds of people and say, gosh, how would worker safety work better or something, So the way this always works is you appoint a small recodification commission and a small group of experts. That's what happened with the Uniform Commercial Code in this country in the 1950s, come up with a plan, and then it gets approved or not or modified by Congress. But a small group comes up with a plan that basically tries to correct for 50 years of mistakes in each area of law.
And from what I understand, part of what the correction would involve would be allowing people who are in government to actually do their jobs, make decisions, not have to try to comply with the bureaucratic dictates.
Well, yeah, it gives everybody more freedom to adapt to the particular situation. But key to this is being able to hold government officials accountable. If somebody abuses their power, if they're a jerk, they ought to be able to be fired. And I just got a call from the White House recently asking me if I could help come up with a complete overhaul of that system of public employment, which I've written a lot about. And that's absolutely critical to this idea of pushing the reset button.
So is the problem tied to the people involved, or is it the system? I mean, if the people were given more flexibility, would we see better outcomes?
Well, it's both. I mean, the culture of government's awful now. I mean, Washington, I get a rash whenever I go over the bridge from the airport. It's just a horrible place. I mean, people, they wouldn't they wouldn't know what responsibility was. I mean, one of the things I suggest in my new book, Try Common Sense, is that we move most agencies out of Washington and move them around the country. So, we could move the Department of Transportation to North Carolina. Great. I mean, why not? It would work better. The Centers for Disease Control is in Atlanta. It works better than the agencies in Washington. But for democracy to work, you need to let the people who are elected make new choices, and that includes choices about who's implementing the law. And right now, all the links in that chain are broken. And one of the points that I make that people just don't understand, the cure to red tape is responsibility and accountability. You don't need all this red tape. You don't need to spend 5 years on a permit. If you let people use their judgment and be accountable if they do a bad job or if they're on the take or something, so the only way to actually alleviate the frustration and the alienation, I mean, law is piled up so much that everybody's now trained to go through the day saying, can I prove what I'm about to do is legally correct? Businesses don't give job references and teachers won't put an arm around a crying child. It's madness.
We are chatting with Philip Howard. He is the author of the book Try Common Sense. Do you get a sense that the people who are working in government now want that responsibility and accountability, or do they like this system where they can write their way out of responsibility by making sure they just check the boxes?
Responsibility is their worst nightmare. They absolutely don't want responsibility. And the only way to make them take responsibility is to fire them if they don't. I mean, there are, frankly, if you look at anything that works, and not everything in government's broken. You can find agencies where people do a good job and such. And if you look in those agencies, or go to any public school that works well, you'll find people who wake up in the morning saying, I'm going to go make sense of these choices and make this work. So nothing works unless a person makes it work. In the history of civilization, nothing ever got accomplished because somebody followed a rule. Rules are there to prevent bad things from happening. They don't make good things happen. And so, that's one of the reasons I think we should move the agencies out of Washington. We need new people.
I understand that one of your arguments is that we have reached the political state that we have now largely because people have been so fed up with this system that one of the things that attracted them to Donald Trump was he wanted to come in and wreck the bad system.
Sure. I mean, Donald Trump's just a symptom of this extraordinary alienation from government by the American people. They hate it. And yet, if you look at the candidates, if you look at all the Democratic candidates, you can't find one who has any idea about how to make government work better. They're talking about socialism or Medicare for all or the Green New Deal or something like that. They're not talking about actually making government responsive. And if you go to the Trump administration, they have the kind of right instinct about fixing government, but they don't. Their only idea is sort of deregulation, which is good in some areas. I mean, some things we shouldn't be regulating, but it's not the cure for red tape. The cure for red tape is responsibility and accountability. And so there are lots of things that people want clean water and clean air, but it shouldn't drive people nuts. You shouldn't have inspectors giving fines to farmers because there's insignificant runoff.
You've been watching this for years. You've been writing about it since the 1990s. How convinced are you that at some point we are going to take these steps to re-inject common sense into the system?
Oh, great question. I can't make change. You can't make change. Change is happening. Donald Trump is a symptom of change. Washington might as well be the court of Louis XVI. It's collapsing. I mean, people hate it. So it's going to change. But look at where the needle is going. Look at where the left is going, the lunacy. What's needed is a radical centrist platform. The forces of change will come from the people. What I'm worried about is that there's no coherent vision of what the change ought to be. And what I'm preaching, if you will, is a system that gives back to humans the freedom to take responsibility. And where law is a framework for freedom, it's not an instruction manual that tells us how to live our lives correctly. It's just absurd.